Commissioner Roemer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Clarke. I want to thank you as I start my questions for your 30 years of public service to the American people. I want to thank you for your sworn testimony before the 9/11 Commission, over 15 hours. And I really want to say, Mr. Clarke, that there are a lot of distractions out there today. There are books, a lot of news media, a lot of accusations flying back and forth. I want you to concentrate to the degree you can on the memos, on the email, on the strategy papers, and on the time that we're tasked with looking at on this 9/11 Commission between 1998 and September the 11th. You coordinated counterterrorism policy in both the Clinton and the Bush administrations. I want to know, first of all, was fighting al-Qaeda a top priority for the Clinton administration from 1998 to the year 2001? How high of priority was it in that Clinton administration during that time period?
My impression was that fighting terrorism in general and fighting al-Qaeda in particular were an extraordinarily high priority in the Clinton administration, certainly no higher priority. There were priorities probably of equal importance, such as the Middle East peace process, but I certainly don't know of one that was any higher in the priority of that administration.
With respect to the Bush administration, from the time they took office until September 11th, 2001, you had much to deal with: Russia, China, G8, the Middle East. How high a priority was fighting al-Qaeda in the Bush administration?
I believe the Bush administration in the first 8 months considered terrorism an important issue, but not an urgent issue. President Bush himself says as much in his interview with Bob Woodward in the book Bush at War. He said, "I didn't feel a sense of urgency." George Tenet and I tried very hard to create a sense of urgency by seeing to it that intelligence reports on the al-Qaeda threat were frequently given to the President and other high-level officials. And there was a process underway to address al-Qaeda. But although I continue to say it was an urgent problem, I don't think it was ever treated that way.
Now, you have said in many ways you've issued some blistering attacks on the Bush administration, but you have not held those criticisms from the Clinton administration either. We heard from Mr. Berger earlier that you were critical of the Clinton administration on two areas: not providing aid to the Northern Alliance and not going after the human conveyor belts of jihadists coming out of the sanctuaries in Afghanistan. Are there more in the Clinton administration years? The USS Cole, the response there?
Well, I think, first of all, Mr. Berger is right to say that almost everything I ever asked for in the way of support from him or from President Clinton, I got. We did enormously increase the counterterrorism budget of the federal government, initiated many programs, including what is now called Homeland Security. Mr. Berger is also right to note that I wanted a covert action program to aid Afghan factions to fight the Taliban, and that was not accomplished. He's also right to note that on several occasions, including after the attack on the Cole, I suggested that we bomb all of the Taliban and al-Qaeda infrastructure. Whether or not it would succeed in killing bin Laden, I thought that was the wrong way of looking at the problem. I think the answer is essentially Mr. Berger got it right.
Okay. Let's move into, with my 15 minutes, let's move into the Bush administration. On January the 25th, we've seen a memo that you've written to Dr. Rice urgently asking for a principles review of al-Qaeda. You include helping the Northern Alliance, covert aid, significant new O2 budget authority to help fight al-Qaeda, and a response to the USS Cole. You attached to this document both the Linda Plan of 1998 and a strategy paper from December 2000. Do you get a response to this urgent request for a principals meeting on these, and how does this affect your time frame for dealing with these important issues?
I did get a response. The response was that in the Bush administration, I should, and my committee, the Counterterrorism Security Group, should report to the Deputies Committee, which is a sub-cabinet level committee, and not to the principals. And that therefore it was inappropriate for me to be asking for a principals meeting. Instead, there would be a deputies meeting.
So does this slow the process down to go to the deputies rather than to the principals or a small group as you previously had done?
It slowed it down enormously by months. First of all, the Deputies Committee didn't meet urgently in January or February. Then when the Deputies Committee did meet, it took the issue of al-Qaeda as part of a cluster of policy issues, including nuclear proliferation in South Asia, democratization in Pakistan, how to treat the problems, the various problems, including narcotics and other problems in Afghanistan, and launched on a series of deputies meetings extending over several months to address al-Qaeda in the context of all of those interrelated issues. That process probably ended, I think, in July of 2001. So we were ready for a principals meeting in July, but the principals' calendar was full, and then they went on vacation, many of them in August, so we couldn't meet in August, and therefore the principals met in September.
So as the Bush administration is carefully considering, from bottom up, a full review of fighting terrorism, what happens to these individual items, like a response to the USS Cole,
well,
flying the Predator? Why aren't these decided in a shorter time frame, as they're also going through a larger policy review of how this policy affects Pakistan and other countries? Important considerations, but why can't you do both?
The Deputies Committee, its chairman, Mr. Hadley, and others, thought that all of these issues were sufficiently interrelated that they should be taken up as a set of issues, and pieces of them should not be broken off.
Did you agree with that?
No, I didn't agree with much of that.
Were you frustrated by this process?
I was sufficiently frustrated that I asked to be reassigned.
When was this?
Probably May or June, certainly no later than June. And there was agreement in that time frame, in the May or June time frame, that I would be, my request would be honored, and I would be reassigned on the 1st of October to a new position to deal with cybersecurity, a position that I requested be created.
So you're saying that the frustration got to a high enough level that it wasn't your portfolio, it wasn't doing a lot of things at the same time, it was that you weren't getting fast enough action on what you were requesting?
That's right. My view was that this administration, while it listened to me, didn't either believe me that there was an urgent problem or was unprepared to act as though there were an urgent problem. And I thought, if the administration doesn't believe its national coordinator for counterterrorism when he says there's an urgent problem, and if it's unprepared to act as though there's an urgent problem, then probably I should get another job. I thought cybersecurity was, and I still think cybersecurity is an extraordinarily important issue for which this country is very underprepared, and I thought perhaps I could make a contribution if I worked full-time on that issue.
You then write a letter or a memo on September the 4th to Dr. Rice expressing some of these frustrations. Several months later, if you say the time frame is May or June when you decided to resign, a memo comes out that we have seen on September the 4th. You are blunt and blasting DOD for not willingly using the force and the power. You blast the CIA for blocking Predator. You urge policymakers to imagine a day after hundreds of Americans lay dead in a home or abroad after a terrorist attack and ask themselves what else they could have done. You write this on September the 4th, 7 days before September 11th.
That's right.
What else could have been done, Mr. Clarke?
Well, all of the things that we recommended in the plan or strategy, there's a lot of debate about whether it's a plan or a strategy or a series of options, but all of the things we recommended back in January were those things on the table in September. They were done. They were done after September 11th. They were all done. I didn't really understand why they couldn't have been done in February.
Well, let's say, Mr. Clarke, I think this is a fair question. Let's say that you asked to brief the President of the United States on counterterrorism. Did you ask that?
I asked for a series of briefings on the issues in my portfolio, including counterterrorism and cybersecurity.
Did you get that request?
I did. I was given a briefing opportunity to brief on cybersecurity in June. I was told I could brief the President on terrorism after this policy development process was complete and we had the principals meeting and a draft national security policy decision that had been approved by the Deputies Committee.
Let's say, Mr. Clarke, as gifted as you might be in eloquence and silver-tongued as anyone could be, and let's imagine that instead of saying no, you asked for this briefing to the President. You said you didn't get it after 8 months of talking. Let's say you get this briefing in February after your memo to Dr. Rice on September the 25th, and you meet with the President of the United States in February, and you brief him on terrorism. Tell me how you convince the President to move forward on this and get this principals meeting that doesn't take place until September the 4th moved up so that you can do something about this problem.
Well, I think the best thing to have done, if there had been a meeting with the President in February, was to show him the accumulated intelligence that al-Qaeda was strong and was planning attacks against the United States, against friendly governments. It was possible to make a very persuasive case that this was a major threat and this was an urgent problem.
And you think this would have sped up the deputies process and the principals process?
Well,
do you think the President would have reached down then and said something to the national security team to
I don't know.
expedite this? Well, you worked for President Clinton. You saw what meetings with presidents could do there. Is this a magical solution, or is it something that presidents might say right back to you, listen, Dick, I've got many other things I've got to do here in the Middle East peace process, Bosnia, Kosovo, the Korean Peninsula. How likely is it that we are able to see some kind of result from a meeting like that?
I think it depends in part on the President. President Bush was regularly told by the Director of Central Intelligence that there was an urgent threat. On one occasion, he was told this dozens of times in the morning briefings that George Tenet gave him. On one of those occasions, he asked for a strategy and to deal with the threat. Condi Rice came back from that meeting, called me, and relayed what the President had requested. And I said, well, you know, we've had this strategy ready since before you were inaugurated. I showed it to you. You have the paperwork. We can have a meeting on the strategy anytime you want. She said she would look into it. Her looking into it and the President asking for it did not change the pace at which it was considered. And as far as I know, the President never asked again. At least I was never informed that he asked again. I do know he was thereafter continually informed about the threat by George Tenet.
Let me ask you, with my yellow light on, a question about the summer of 2000 alert. You were saying, the CIA was saying, everybody was saying something spectacular is about to happen. Spiking in intelligence something terrible is about to happen. You've told us in some of our interviews you only wish you would have known at that time, in that summer, what the FBI knew with regard to Moussaoui, the Phoenix memo, and terrorists in the United States. What could you have done with some of that information, with these spiked alerts, with the spectacular attack on the horizon in the summer of 2001?
Well, Congressman, it is very easy in retrospect to say that I would have done this or I would have done that. And we'll never know. I would like to think that had I been informed by the FBI that two senior al-Qaeda operatives who had been in a planning meeting earlier in Kuala Lumpur were now in the United States, and we knew that, and we knew their names, and I think we even had their pictures, I would like to think that I would have released, or would have had the FBI release a press release with their names, with their descriptions, held a press conference, tried to get their names and pictures on the front page of every paper, America's Most Wanted, the Evening News, and caused a successful nationwide manhunt for those two of the 19 hijackers. But I don't know, because you're asking me a hypothetical, and I have the benefit now of 20/20 hindsight.
Thank you, Mr. Clarke. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the patience and the time.